Okay, welcome back to YA ThrillerCon. I'm Matt Killeen, author of Author Monster Spy and its sequel Devil Darling Spy, and today I'm delighted to be talking with Savita Kalhan, author of The Girl in the Broken Mirror, That Asian Kid, and the soon-to-be reissued thriller The Long Weekend. Welcome, Savita.
Thank you very much.
This discussion will probably need a content warning for sexual, physical abuse, and yeah, so please be guided by that. So, Savita, would you like to quickly introduce yourself and tell us a little about The Long Weekend?
Okay. Well, my name is Savita Kalhan, and I'm the author of The Long Weekend, The Girl in the Broken Mirror, and That Asian Kid. I'm a children's author who mainly writes for older teenagers and young adults. I did many things before becoming a writer, and I only fell into writing quite by accident when I was living in the Middle East in the 90s, where there were no books really that were available to me. So I used to smuggle them into the kingdom, and when they weren't so good, I decided to try my hand at writing a fantasy epic, which I wrote by hand, 6 books, 600,000 words, all by hand. But when I came back to the UK, my writing took a very different turn. It became much more contemporary and very much darker, and that's how The Long Weekend kind of came into being. So The Long Weekend is about 2 boys who get into the wrong car after school on a Friday afternoon. The driver is a man who means to harm them. He takes them to a mansion in the middle of nowhere. These 2 boys are very new friends. Sam, the main character, has just joined the school, and Lloyd is a cool kid who he's befriended, and he thinks he's going home with Lloyd, and he's not sure though which parent is picking them up. So that's the premise of the book.
So I found the whole thing like nightmarish in the extreme. I don't think I've seen an 11-year-old's thought process so perfectly captured in those opening chapters. And as a grown-up reading that, it's like, yeah. So how did you do that? What is your sort of inspiration for your inner 11-year-old?
I think it was my son who was around that age at the time. And I'm sorry, it's nightmarish in the extreme. Parents have said actually it's far more terrifying for them to read this book because they know much more about what might happen to the kids. So my son was 10 and he's got lots of friends and lots of cousins. And so I was very privileged to be able to listen in on their conversations and how they talk when they used to come over and play. Sam, the main character, basically popped into my head, fully formed, and his voice was really, really clear. So he was such an easy character to write. I think all my books are very much character-led. So I was inside his head and I was able to see what was going on from his point of view and how he would react.
So was there any other research you did before writing the book?
For this one, actually, very, very little. I asked lots of Year 7 boys, would they get into a car with their friend if they didn't know their friend's dad? And they all said yes. And that was pretty terrifying. So I did tell my son, never, ever get into your friend's car if you haven't met their parents before. Well, I had to give him that warning. So I knew from asking all those kids that Sam and Lloyd would definitely get into the car, and well, they don't really realize their mistake until a little bit later. So I sat down in the autumn to write this book, and I think it took 7 weeks to write this. Pretty much just flowed, completely just flowed, and it is a shorter book than my other books. The only real research I did was actually after I finished the book, because I hadn't written anything like this before, and I didn't have an agent. I didn't know any writers, published or non-published. So I was a complete newbie. So I went to the bookshop and bought a copy of the Writers and Artists Yearbook. And that's when I did the research, when looking for an agent or looking for a publisher. So I looked for an agent in the first instance, but that was pretty much my only research that I did for this book.
So many of your books discuss abuse. The Girl in the Broken Mirror, particularly. When I first read Test of the D'Urbervilles, it like just angered me so much. Like I was like, what is this? So reading The Girl in the Broken Mirror, not much more comforting than that. How important is it that we talk about these things?
Well, I think it's extremely important. My books are read by both girls and boys. I run a teen reading group, and the boys in the group read the book actually before it was published. And they said that it was a really hard book to read for them. Didn't put them off finishing the book. They did finish the book. So I thought, okay, I want to make the book not graphic. I want to make it relevant and accessible to boys and girls. And I've had amazing feedback from teenagers, basically saying that it's helped open a dialogue about consequences of choices and actions, which I think really important for teenagers to be discussing, especially in the current climate, to also understand about boundaries of consent, respect. And these teenagers are developing into adults. So I think it's really important for them to be discussing and looking at these things while they're still developing into adults. The other thing was that everything is reported. Kids record everything on their phones. They download things. So in that Asian Kid, I bring in that other element of where things are posted online constantly. And it has been a form of, I suppose, bullying in a way. That's happened. Persecution and bullying has happened. So I think it's really important to open these discussions between teenagers, in a safe environment, between teenagers and teachers, librarians, and parents as well.
I mean, I think the book, The Long Weekend, treads a really fine line between sort of prurient and necessary cautionary tale. I know I agonized about aspects of Orphan Monster Spy, lost sleep over it. How did you manage it? Is there anything that you kept front and center when you were writing it?
Yeah, I did. I kept the age of the readers right in the front of my head. So the whole story is told from a child's point of view, from Sam's point of view, and he's an 11-year-old. And there is a scene in the book which I really thought very long and hard about before I wrote, and while I was writing it, and after I had written it. I did try and pare it back as much as possible. So the scene is when Lloyd is with the man and Sam is hiding under the bed, and he covers his ears, and then he feels he should uncover his ears because he kind of needs to know what's going on in a way, but even though he doesn't want to. And it's really quite distressing, that scene. I think it was just distressing for me to write it as well. I tried not to be graphic in that scene or go too far. I hope I didn't. I've noticed actually that teenagers tend to skim through that scene. Lots of teenagers have read the book and not really absorbed that aspect of it. They've seen it as more of a straightforward, pretty much straightforward thriller. So I think teenagers are very good at censoring themselves, censoring scenes, taking in what they can, absorbing what they can, and leaving the rest in the book, leaving it behind. Hopefully on some level they understand what's going on, but it doesn't have to be on every level. So yeah, that was really, really hard. And with the teen reading group I run, I suggested a book to them once, which I hadn't had a chance to read yet. It was by a renowned Carnegie author, shortlisted author. He sadly died with the book unfinished. So another well-known children's author finished the book. So I started reading the book, and as I was reading it, I realized that actually I should not have suggested this to the kids because I hadn't read it and I didn't know what was going to happen in the first 60 pages, which was brutal, absolutely brutal. I would not give it to a teenager now without lots of warnings, basically, because I don't think it's actually, personally, I don't think it's a children's book. I think it's definitely 16 plus, maybe even 18 plus, but it's got horrific, disturbing scenes of child abuse. So I don't know whether that writer, did he agonize over that? Did he have to go so far? I try not to, personally. Even in The Girl in the Broken Mirror, I tried not to. The the rape scene in that book is a very powerful scene, but it's not graphic in that way, and it's almost like a dream sequence. And my heroine in that book, Jay, absolutely, one of her favorite books is Tess of the D'Urbervilles. So it's got mixed up in her head what's happening to her as she's lying in bed with what happens with Tess. So yeah, I do try really hard because I want the book to be read, and if it's too much for a kid to read, then I'm not doing my job properly, I think. So I try and write as sensitively and as appropriately as I can, basically. I don't know how it was for you, Matt, when you were writing that scene, because you've got a pretty huge monster in your book.
Yeah, I mean, that, you know, it was not uncontroversial. There were people who really people who wanted to publish the book, but they said that bit just has to come out. And I was like, I kind of feel it needs to be there, you know. And writing it is horrible because you have to be in the head of the character, but you also have to be in the head of the perpetrator. And that's, I mean, I made myself kind of nauseous, like just doing that. And I think, you know, kids ask me, you know, why I wanted to write about that. And I think I know that it's important that people talk about it, and that the survivors of such things say, you know, I have a friend who was a survivor of a situation, and she said, you know, that people need to talk about it, but it's just like desperately uncomfortable, and it makes people sick, and they turn away from it, and then it means it's never spoken about in public, and that it needs to be, you know, people need to be aware of this stuff. And so that was, I kind of clung to that as I moved forward, and I am reasonably sure that I got the level right there.
No, I think you did.
Yeah,
definitely. Yes.
And I think you did, because that scene, since we've spoilers all over the place on your book, I think that you did do it well, because it does not tell you anything. The level of detail is then what your brain inserts. So I'm not surprised there are some young teenagers who may have read that and just gone straight over it and not quite sussed. And then you have dropped a few bits in which make it really clear what has just happened, but you wouldn't necessarily spot that if you weren't experienced. And it's I think it's beautifully done.
Oh, thank you. So
horrible, traumatic, but, you know, executed to perfection.
It's often what's not said, actually. If your writing is quite sparse, it's actually sometimes what's not said that resonates much more and can make it much more powerful scene, especially for older readers reading it.
Yeah. So when you wrote that, did you have any particular real life examples in mind when you conceived the story, or?
No, I didn't actually. I'll tell you what happened. My son came home with a flyer from school saying that a flashy car had been seen outside local schools, and the driver had tried to snatch a child. Now that really kind of shocked. That was like a frightening thought that this might be happening, or someone was trying to do that. And after school, it's like chaotic outside schools. People, you know, kids are screaming, and some are crying and being dragged into cars or whatever. You know, there is a lot of noise and hubbub. Things can happen without you realizing it. And this scenario came to my mind where it could happen actually with terrifying ease, and that was the trigger for this story. That's how it started. But I remember in that year and the year before and the year when I was writing the story, Gary Glitter had just been jailed for child abuse, and I had met him when I was at uni, and he had given me a red rose. He was leaving in his car at the end of the concert, and this is in the early 90s, and I looked very young. He gave me a red rose and invited me back, and I ran a mile, obviously. Little did I know, you know, what kind of person, what kind of monster he actually was. And I think the girl in Austria, Natasha, that story had just come to light, where she'd been kept trapped in a basement for 8 years. So sadly, there have always been horrible stories, horrific, tragic stories. They've always been monsters. And so this my monster is, I don't dwell on him. I don't give him very many features. I don't go into his head. I don't want to particularly. So it is all from the children's point of view. And as a survivor myself, I can get inside a survivor's head. I understand what they've gone through and what they, So there wasn't actually anything in particular that, but the flyer from the school really triggered the whole story for me. And having a 10-year-old who might be vulnerable.
Absolutely. So The Long Weekend first came out in 2008. And what kind of things are you updating for the reissue?
Oh my gosh. Well, everything has changed since then. Technology has gone way beyond. Now, I have to take in small part credit for the iPhone, because when I wrote this book, there was no iPhone. When I wrote this book, there were phones, mobile phones, and there were iPods. No one had music on their phones at all when I wrote this book. So in the book, Sam actually says that one day there's going to be a phone where you can have all your music, and this phone will also have a compass, because that's what he really wanted, a compass, and he wanted a phone that had all his music and not have to have someone's cast off iPod. So I think it was a year later, the very first iPhone was unleashed upon the world. So I think I should take a little bit of credit for that. So I need to update all those references, iPods and mobile phones. I think I probably have to do the DVDs and CDs. I don't know whether kids even know what a CD looks like anymore. I don't know. Luckily, I didn't put any vinyl in there, otherwise, because I'm sure that has made a comeback.
I think vinyl is back. They'll know.
Yeah. So I don't know much about teen music anymore, but I know lots of kids, so I've asked them for their top 10s, and they've happily given me their top 10 bands or singers that they like. So so that's the kind of thing that I'm updating.
I think it highlights the dangers of writing authentic contemporary kidlit. I know Jacqueline Wilson won't do contemporary anymore because she just goes like, I can't keep up, I cannot make it work. But how do you think a writer can avoid those kind of pitfalls in this day and age?
Write fantasy. I think it's really hard to avoid these kinds of pitfalls. I think it's virtually impossible. I think technology is just changing way too rapidly. And not just that, social media, kids at one time, they all wanted to be on Facebook. Now it's for their parents, it's not for them anymore. And so their forums are changing constantly. So what do? Do you mention Snapchat? There might be something else tomorrow. Probably is already, I don't know. But I think actually in many ways, and I was in two minds about updating the book, because I think it's quite good for kids, for teenagers to know a world where there weren't any mobile phones, where there were only landlines and the cords always got raveled up, and so I'm in two minds about that. I would quite like for there to still to be some books which are written today maybe, but don't feature all the new things. I don't know how you would avoid it though if you're writing one now. With that Asian kid, that was quite straightforward, because teenagers are still uploading stuff onto whatever site, so that's fine. But beyond that, I really don't know how you would do. I don't know how you're dealing with it, Matt.
Well, avoiding contemporary. I write history or alternate history that I'm working on at the moment. So
historical.
It's an alternate history 1968. So no phones, like nicely out of the way, because the phone is the game changer. Now everybody has a phone. It's not the parents you have to kill, it's the phones you have to kill, I think.
Exactly. I kill the phone. Lloyd has a phone, but is killed in the beginning because the battery's dead. So
Yeah.
that, yeah, I get rid of that problem straight away, luckily.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's very hard.
It is hard. So the long weekend doesn't touch on some of the issues discussed in your other books, and I have you to thank for opening my eyes to some of publishing industry's systemic racism, because it is sometimes easy to miss it when you are a white writer. I hope you don't mind if I tell you the story that we were at a literary event, and you said, "That woman over there just said this." And I remember I went, "Really?" And it wasn't that I didn't believe you. It was just I couldn't believe that she would say something like that so openly at a public event. And you took my hand and you brought me over and introduced me to her, and then stood behind me with your head here. And it was like a director's commentary, like a DVD's director's commentary. That's another thing that's gone out the window, where you gave me the subtext of every single thing she was saying. And it was like eye-opening horror, that these were views and considerations that still existed. So I have you to thank for that.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. Now, recent events have highlighted these ongoing and endemic problems, but I have to ask, from your point of view, have we made any progress since Long Weekend first came out in 2008?
Well, when The Long Weekend came out, I didn't think that I could write an Asian character into a book then. I didn't think it would get published. There were hardly any books with any Asian characters in them. So The Long Weekend is about two white boys. There are no people of color in the book. And the books that were coming out at the time, there were white writers who were writing sometimes Hindu or Muslim characters into their books, and these books won prizes, but they would often get details wrong. Even the name, sometimes they would give a Muslim name to a Hindu character, and so there was no checking done, and it was really galling, especially when they won prizes for with just littered with mistakes. When my agent submitted The Girl in the Broken Mirror to publishers, one editor at a publishing house asked if I would consider changing all the characters to white rather than Asian. And that was that was shocking. That was absolutely shocking. Obviously, I didn't, and the book took longer to find a publisher. Publishers were basically interested in now they're much more still interested in more exotic stories or stories of kids on council estates, sadly. So when that Asian kid came, when I wrote that and that was submitted, it didn't fit in with the kind of books that they were looking for. So even though I can write Asian characters, and there are lots more now than ever before, Asian and Black authors with main characters in their books who are Black or Asian, the industry hasn't changed enough. They are still, I feel, slightly pigeonholed with the types of books that they are allowed to write. So with that Asian kid, obviously, he's a regular kid. He's a bit of a smart aleck, but he's not on a council estate, and he's not. It's not set in India where it's all exotic, and that it's not that kind of story. It's a more realistic, contemporary. It's about racism, yes. So it's more gritty and hard edged, which is what I write anyway. But it doesn't fit in with what publishing industry wants. So I have to find a smaller publisher. Basically, that makes it harder for me to get books into teenagers' hands, because smaller publishers don't have budgets like the big ones do. The big ones have huge school fairs. They take bundles of books into schools. Smaller publishers don't have that kind of budget. They're not able to do that. So as an Asian writer, I have to work doubly hard at promotion, marketing, publicity, everything, to be able to get my books into the hands of my readers. So yeah, it's an uphill struggle, and I think a lot has to change with the industry before it's where it should be.
Yeah, we're recording this. I'm sure there's going to be some other appalling racist mess by the time this actually gets broadcast. So yeah, I think Kidlit's got a long way to go.
Well, it has, because the industry is predominantly white. So when you have white editors and they have a particular types of books that they want, then it's very hard as a Asian or Black author to submit to them, because I want to write what I want to write. I don't want to write what they want. And I refuse to do that. Perhaps I should be doing that. I don't know. Things haven't changed enough, basically, but they have changed they have changed, but not enough, in my view.
So, what have you been reading recently that rocked your world?
Well, I usually have several books on the go. I'm really quite bad about that. And I'm still heavily into fantasy epics. That's been my first love. So I am reading Robin Hobb's The Assassin's Apprentice series, which is about 14 books long. I'm on book 7, I think. And I read recently the Diva Bad trilogy by S.A. Chakraborty. I think she's an American writer. And it blew me away. Set in 18th century Cairo, full of jinn, politics, intrigue, and lots of magic, of course. And I love that. I really like Ruta Sepetys as a YA read. I think she's more challenging. She picks a moment in time in history, usually around the Second World War, and she highlights it in a way that I think it's really important. Her books can be harrowing. They're always gripping, and I absolutely love Phantoms in Silence and Salt in the Sea was the other one that I really loved. So what about you? What are you reading?
Oh, what am I reading at the moment? I just read this. I finally caught up with Sheila Averbuch's Friend Me, which is, sort of contemporary bullying cyber horror story. And lots of really dull research about 1968. So I got pulled into a rabbit hole on the Vietnam War, even though I had decided that I was in my alternate history, the Vietnam War just wasn't going to happen because that was just too much stuff to incorporate. But I got kind of sucked into that. So there's a book called The Best and the Brightest, which is basically, privileged white men making errors from 1961 all the way through to 1968. And it is just...
Oh gosh, I'll have to write that down. Best and the Brightest.
Yeah, it's a chunky novel, but it is, I think I grew up thinking that most of the time historical figures were making reasonable decisions, but this has just proven not to be the case. The whole 20th century is just one long horror story.
Oh, it is, yes.
Stupid, selfish things, and wonder why lots of people died.
Well,
yes,
I've been
cheery.
Yeah, I know. Research can be, you go down rabbit holes and you just get lost inside them sometimes. I've been researching a historical book that I'm thinking of. I've been writing it a bit, and you can get lost. And 19th and 20th centuries can be pretty awful. Actually, white men have made terrible decisions throughout that time. So yeah, it is interesting.
And I wish I'd asked you about that earlier, because we're basically out of time, unfortunately. I will call you. Well, The Long Weekend is getting its reissue in October, and it's getting a new cover and a very moody cover, and it can be pre-ordered from all the usual places. And not forgetting Savita's other excellent work, The Girl in the Broken Mirror and That Asian Kid, which are available now. So Savita Kalhan, thank you very much.